this bill speaks in large part about South Africa being punished, not only for being aligned to certain countries, but also for its stance on Israel. If South Africa is sanctioned, surely you've got to take some flack for what you have gone to America to propose. Will you take responsibility if ultimately South Africa is sanctioned?
I don't see why we should be taking responsibility for something that we don't advocate. And then secondly, when it comes to this bill specifically, it talks about the actions of the South African government as a whole, but at the same time, it talks about the consequences being that certain politicians will be targeted with those sanctions.
And this is going to now involve, or it's going to affect just about everyone. So how do you avoid a situation where the government says, well, this is what AfriForum advocated for, and therefore they must take responsibility for what has happened? How do you avoid being lynched, so to speak?
I really can't see why punishing corrupt politicians is going to destroy a country's economy. That's going to be left up to the ANC to explain.
Yes, ANC politicians perhaps deserve punishment, to use your words. However, it's the whole country being enveloped in the whole sanctions scheme that is going to be punishing for the rest of South Africa. And we both know that South Africa is a majority poor country. Many people in South Africa live below the breadline. And so how do you still justify that?
The point is that this bill is particularly concerned with targeted...
Guys, so this is one of those really awkward interviews that usually occur in South Africa that highlights this, discrepancy between the desires of the different multi-ethnic groups that make South Africa. So Ernst van Zyl, AfriForum, we know AfriForum has actually been in a long brawl for the last months anyway, ever since Trump came into power though, regarding, what many have called feeding the White House with information about South Africa. And maybe because of the information that they feed South Africa, South Africa seems to have attracted a lot of, this is allegedly now, but this has actually been the position of many analysts. South Africa has attracted sanctions and all of that. And actually, 2 weeks ago, I think even recently anyway, a bill was passed that has now moved forward. And that bill intends to target sanctions, to effectuate targeted sanctions against some ANC members. Some of these kind of sanctions would include travel bans and all of that, all right? That's a bill now in the U.S. White House has actually passed to a really stage where at any time the bill could be passed. And in this interview here, I thought this was a really strange interview between Holly of Newsroom and, Ernst van Zyl of AfriForum, where, it appears as though AfriForum, is about to be scapegoated regarding the sanctions that might be coming to specific, I think I would argue, ANC members by the U.S., because of what it argues is an alignment with the likes of its not adversaries, what's the name now in political relations, so to speak. We could call them partners that are actually against their own positionality, the likes of Iran, Russia, China. The ANC government in the previous years have actually been aligned to these countries. And I think also in the GNU, because I think there was one rep of the GNU, or was it Conor Mulder? I think Conor Mulder was arguing that in terms of foreign relations, although they are in the GNU, the Government of National Unity, the ANC still has the responsibility in terms of a larger yoke in terms of policy, international policy, so to speak. Now, the ANC might likely get dragged into these, sanctions, so to speak, and I think that wouldn't bode well. And this is apart from the fact that by August 1st, South Africa might be expecting a 40% tariff. That's 30% from the initial tariffs that was slammed by Trump, and then I think an extra 10% for South Africa's alignment to BRICS recently as we saw in the BRICS summit, which President Ramaphosa attended in Brazil. Now, Oli here in this interview is asking Van Zyl to explain how AfriForum plans to escape being lynched or being scapegoated, knowing fully well of the fact that AfriForum, now this is according to Zoli, AfriForum has ears. And this is where I really got intrigued, because Oli argues that AfriForum has the ear of the White House, all right? And so that was a really interesting statement. In other words, the White House has been speaking to AfriForum, although, as you could see as I put it at the beginning of the video, AfriForum hasn't clarified who it is that probably they have been speaking to. This is allegedly now, according to Oli, but I thought that was really interesting. And also the fact that these Afrikaner representatives in the likes of Corne Mulder from the FF Plus, Theo Dajaga, who I think is a farmer, group, the popular farmer rep in South Africa, and then also the NEASA boss, I think his name is National Employer Association of South Africa. His name, I'll try to get his name in a bit, but they actually went to the US to, I think, get this information. I think this is information that it appears as though many analysts have argued that President Ramaphosa didn't clarify to South Africans what the results of the Trump meeting and the negotiations were all about. So in other words, these Afrikaners now went to the US again, as you could see in the videos I made when Corne Mulder had that brawl at the Hudson Institute with different people answering questions about the future of South Africa and all of that. And Van Zyl here, I think this was a really smart one he actually had to do. So he took a time in this interview to educate South Africa on what America actually is calling for to restore favorable relationship between, especially in terms of, I would argue maybe trade, but in terms of favorable relationships anyway between the United States and South Africa. The United States expect these 4 things to be met. First, they want that the whole kill the boer, kill the farmer chant should be condemned, especially in South Africa. We know that, I think, was it the High Court or one of the courts anyway? Was it the Con Court? Actually ruled that the kill the boer, kill the farmer chant isn't hate speech and all of that. Now the US is trying to challenge that, and I think this is where there will be a massive clash between the sovereignty of South Africa and the United States, because at the end of the day, it might seem to be a top-down approach in terms of what many would have called bullying. But at the end of the day, this is one problem I also have with African leadership, all right? If we really think that we are strong enough, we have all the resources, if we think we are strong enough to be able to conduct trade and organize ourselves and all of that, then we should act that way. We shouldn't be having politicians or our government embroiled in different forms of corruption and actually losing the trust and the confidence of the citizens, lack of accountability in many of our governments. And at the end of the day, we want to stand toe-to-toe with such a really robust, economically vibrant, society as the United States. I don't think it would work, all right? So this is actually one thing that, America is actually demanding that the whole kill the boer, kill the farmer chant has to be condemned totally. Number two, the US doesn't plan that, it doesn't expect to see the no expropriation without compensation bill effectuated. In other words, so this was a bill that was passed. We saw President Ramaphosa, it was actually a bill that was passed anyway, although it has been defended in many ways that there's nothing like expropriation taking place. But anyway, the US is clear. It wants that bill, the expropriation without compensation bill eliminated, all right? The US also wants triple BEE like policies, that are actually holding sway in South Africa and not to be applied to US companies. I think that's going to be a big one, because we know that investors who come into the country, or probably this is actually why Elon Musk is really reluctant to have his Starlink company in South Africa, because he argues that there has to be a large chunk of the company that has to be given away, all right? And The Americans cannot really have that. So they argue that they wouldn't want American companies to be subjected to this triple BEE kind of policies. And finally, they want the government in South Africa to take farm murders as a priority. So the whole thing with farm murders, as we saw 2 months ago, really shaking with the whole Afrikaner refugee program and all of that. The US. So these are the 4 conditions that Ernst Van Zyl took the opportunity in this interview to explain. And that's why I think it's really important that you guys watch this interview to the very end, because Ernst Van Zyl took the opportunity to really educate South Africans on what it is that the US is actually demanding for to restore healthy relationship between itself and South Africa, which probably many people from the standpoint of view of the government weren't able to attain after President Ramaphosa visited the United States. So let's quickly listen to this interview, Ernst Van Zyl, as he actually responds to allegations of being scapegoated in terms of this sanctions that actually allegations of sanctions to hit specific ANC members, and also what it is that would be the response of AfriForum if it's been, subjected or lynched subjected or lynched. I think I'm coming. If it's being subjected or lynched because of the tariffs being hit that might likely hit South Africa. And let's have a robust discussion about this. Share your thoughts in the comments.
DK. You're watching News at Prime. All right, let's take you back to one of the leading stories now. Lobby group AfriForum welcoming the progress of a US bill that's targeting specific ANC leaders, reiterating its stance that it never advocated for the targeting of the country as a whole. Ernst Roots, or rather Ernst Van Zyl, is from AfriForum, and he joins us now. Ernst, good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. I was saying when you couldn't hear me earlier that important not to confuse viewers here and make them think that there is now a law that's already been passed in America. This is a bill. It's basically a proposed law that is going to target South Africa and specific ANC leaders. It's in its infancy stages. Your thoughts about what it says, though, ultimately, because you were a huge proponent of this being done by America.
I think that's very important context. Thank you very much for that. Yes, this bill is not going to be instated as law tomorrow or today or even in the near future. It is now on it's one step closer to realization. And AfriForum welcomes this bill being one step closer to realization, seeing as it is exactly what we've been advocating for: targeted sanctions rather than sanctions that target South Africa as a whole, and sanctions that target specifically those politicians that are corrupt and are getting away with corruption, and those that are pushing laws that amount to abuse of human rights. So I think this bill is right on the money, and that's why AfriForum welcomes it. And we'll see where it goes. There's still a long road ahead, but we will be watching closely.
There is that specific disclaimer, if you like, where you say, as AfriForum, you never advocated for the whole country to be sanctioned. But as you hear it,